The sun burned hot over the city of Karvik. It was not a kind place. Not for the weak, not for the broken, especially not for a girl like her. She was chained to a rusted metal post. Sitting on the dirt, knees to her chest, her skin was pale and bruised, her silver hair tangled and dusty. A thick iron collar pressed against her neck, cutting every time she moved. Her eyes, once bright, were dull now, tired, empty. She had stopped crying days ago, maybe weeks. Crying didn't help here. It only made the slavers laugh harder around her. The marketplace was alive, shouts, deals, loud alien voices, and the sharp sound of chains clinking. Slaves stood in rows. Cleaner, younger, stronger than her. They were pushed forward, offered like animals. But no one looked at her. Some avoided her completely. Some laughed and whispered. A child pointed at her and said, "That one looks sick." The parent pulled the child away quickly. She hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe longer. Every bone in her body ached, and the heat was making her dizzy. Her lips were dry, cracked, and her wrists were bleeding under the cuffs. The slaver who owned her sat nearby, drinking a red fruit drink and counting credits. He had tried to sell her many times, but no one wanted a broken dog. He didn't even yell anymore, just left her there, a warning to others. Don't become like this one. She remembered her name, Rava. But no one had spoken it in so long that it felt like a dream. Now, she was just that thing, or the chained one, once. She had a mother who sang to her, a little brother who loved to play in the rain. All gone now, her world was taken. Her people scattered, sold, or killed. She was one of the unlucky ones still alive. Suddenly, the crowd near her shifted. Someone was walking by, not fast, not slow, just different. She didn't look up at first. She was used to footsteps passing, but this time they stopped. A shadow fell over her body, blocking the sun. She slowly lifted her head, expecting a kick or another insult. But what she saw was not what she expected. It was a man, not a rich alien noble. Not a cruel slaver. He was human. His clothes were dusty, simple. Like he had traveled far, his eyes, dark and quiet, looked down at her not with disgust, not with fear, but with something else. Something that made her heart beat once more. Pity maybe, or sorrow, or something deeper. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her. Really looked at her, like she was more than the dirt around her. Her lips trembled. She wasn't sure why she did it. Maybe it was her last hope. Maybe it was her final strength, but she whispered, voice shaking like a leaf in wind, "Please." By me. The words came out rough and broken, but they were real, for a second. She thought he hadn't heard her, but his eyes widened just a little, and he crouched down. Closer to her level. "Say that again," he said softly. She hesitated, her throat dry, her heart thudding in fear and hope. She whispered again, slower this time, "Please. Buy me, not to hurt, just to help." He looked at her like someone seeing a flower growing in the ashes, the kind of look no one had given her in years. Then he stood and walked to the slaver. "That one," he said, pointing. "How much?" The slaver laughed loudly, spit flying. "That one? You serious? She's no good. She's nothing but bones and trouble." "Still," the human said. "How much?" The slaver waved his hand. "Give me 50 credits and take her, or take her for free. She's bad for business." The human dropped the credits into the slaver's hand without a word. He walked back to her, slowly, and reached for the chain. She flinched, expecting pain, but instead, he gently unlocked the cuff from her ankle and collar. The chain hit the ground with a heavy clink. She didn't know how to move. No one had ever touched her without hurting, but he lifted her carefully, like holding something fragile but important. She was weightless in his arms, yet heavy with all she had suffered. He looked down at her. "My name is Elias," he said. "You don't belong here anymore." As he walked away with her in his arms, the crowd grew quiet. No one had ever seen someone buy a slave like that. No one had ever carried one. Gently, like they mattered, and in that moment, for the first time in forever, Rava closed her eyes and let herself believe, maybe, just maybe, she was not lost. Maybe her story was just beginning. Elias walked through the crowded market with Rava in his arms. Her body was small, cold, and shaking, but she was still breathing. People stared as he passed. Some laughing, some whispering. No one helped, no one cared, but he didn't stop. He reached the edge of the market, where the noise faded, and the buildings looked older. There was a small shelter made of scrap metal and old cloth. It was quiet there, far from the slavers and traders. Elias pushed open the curtain and stepped inside. He gently laid Rava down on a soft pile of blankets. She winced at first, still expecting pain. But then she opened her eyes and saw a cup of water in his hand. He held it out without speaking. She looked at it, then at him, unsure. Was this a trick? Was he like the others? But something in his face told her no, he was not like them. Her fingers were weak, so he helped her hold the cup. The first sip burned her dry throat, but she didn't stop. She drank slowly, carefully. Elias said nothing, just watched her quietly after she finished. He placed the cup down and took a small cloth. He dipped it in clean water and gently wiped the dirt from her face. She froze, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. She couldn't remember the last time someone touched her without hate. "You don't have to be scared," Elias said softly. "I won't hurt you." She stared at him, eyes wide. "No chain," she whispered, her voice dry and unsure. "No chain," he replied. "Not ever again." Her lip trembled, and she turned her face away. Tears started falling, but this time they were quiet, not from pain, but something else, something that felt like hope. Elias gave her some broth, warm and full of soft vegetables. She ate slowly, careful not to spill. Every few bites, she paused and looked at him, still testing if this kindness was real. After the meal, she tried to sit up. Her hands shook, but she managed to lean on her elbows. "Why?" "Hugh," she asked. "Why save me?" Elias looked away, thinking. He finally said, "Because no one else did." He stood up and walked to a metal box in the corner. He pulled out a small blanket and covered her gently. "You rest," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." She watched him move to the other side of the shelter. He sat down and leaned against the wall. He didn't leave. He didn't chain her. He just stayed there, as if to protect her from the night. Hours passed, and the city outside grew quiet inside. Rava lay still, but her mind was wide awake. She remembered the cold nights in the market, the kicks, the hunger, the cruel laughter, and now this human, this Elias. He didn't ask for anything, didn't demand, just gave. She wanted to believe it was real, but hope was dangerous. Hope could hurt worse than hunger. Still, she clutched the blanket tighter, and for the first time in years, she let herself close her eyes without fear. In the morning, sunlight peeked through the fabric walls. Elias was already up, cooking something in a metal pot. The smell made Rava's stomach growl loudly. He smiled when he heard it. "Good morning," he said. "You're hungry?" She nodded slowly, not sure how to respond. He brought her a bowl and sat beside her. "Eat slowly," he warned. "You've been starving too long." She took the spoon with both hands and began to eat. It was simple. Food, warm grains and pieces of fruit. But to her, it tasted like a feast. Between bites, she looked at him. "Where am I now?" "This is my place," Elias said. "Not much, but it's safe." She tilted her head. "Curious, you live alone?" He nodded. "Used to work with traders, fixing machines, selling parts. Now I mostly just help where I can." She blinked. "You help? Me?" He nodded again. "You needed it more than anyone else." She set down the spoon. Her voice came quietly. "My name is Rava." Elias smiled. "Rava," he repeated. "Nice to meet you." The way he said her name, soft, respectful, made her chest tightened. It had been so long since she heard it from someone who cared. After the meal, she tried to stand. Her legs shook, but Elias reached out, steadying her gently. "Easy," he said. "You don't have to rush," but she wanted to walk. She wanted to stand. Not just for him, but for herself. Each step hurt, but she took it, step by step. Closer to freedom, Elias watched her silently, not with pity, but with quiet pride. This was the start of something new, something worth fighting for. And, though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew from this moment forward they would face the world together. Rava sat by the open door of the shelter, her legs stretched out in the morning light. She blinked as the wind brushed against her face, soft and warm. It was the first time she felt sunlight without a collar on her neck, and it felt strange. Free, but strange. Elias was nearby, working with old wires and tools spread across the table. He didn't say much, but he always stayed close. That made her feel safe. For 2 days, she had rested, her body slowly gaining strength with food and sleep, but her legs were still weak. Too long in chains had stolen her muscles, her balance, and her courage. She tried standing the night before, only for a second. She fell instantly, pain shooting up her spine. Elias didn't laugh. He didn't say, "I told you so." He only offered his hand and said, "We'll try again tomorrow." Now it was tomorrow. And her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from something else, a small fire growing inside her. She looked at Elias. He noticed and stopped what he was doing. "You want to try?" he asked gently. Rava nodded. Slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't want pity. She wanted to try. Elias walked over and offered his hands. "Just stand," he said. "We don't need to go far." She took his hands, rough, warm, steady. She pushed her feet against the floor. Her knees shook, but she kept going. 1 inch. 2 inches. More. Her legs screamed, her back wobbled, but this time she didn't fall. She was standing, shaky, like a baby animal, but standing. Elias smiled. Not wide, but proud. "That's it," he said softly. "You're doing it." Her breath came quick. But she smiled too. It wasn't much, just 1 step away from the blankets. To her, it felt like crossing a galaxy. She tried taking a step. Her right foot moved, but her left knee gave out. She collapsed, but Elias caught her before she hit the ground. "I failed," she whispered, ashamed. "No," Elias said firmly. "You stood, and you'll do it again." He helped her sit down, brought her water, stayed silent. He didn't treat her like she was broken. He treated her like she was becoming whole again. Later that day, Rava practiced again and again. Each time she stood a little longer, a little straighter. By the end of the day, she managed to take 2 full steps without falling. And when she sat back down, sweating and exhausted, she laughed. A weak, breathless laugh, but real. Elias laughed too, not loud, just enough to fill the room with warmth. At night, they ate together. Rava told him about her world before it was destroyed. She spoke slowly, with long pauses. Her planet had oceans that glowed at night, forests that sang with the wind, and small houses made from stone and light. Elias listened, never interrupting. When she talked about the soldiers who came, the fires, the screams, he looked away. He didn't ask for more. He just said, "You don't have to tell me everything today." That made her chest feel lighter. She wasn't just a story, she was a person again. Before sleeping, Elias gave her a small piece of paper and a pen. "What's this?" she asked, tilting her head. "Write your name," he said. "If you forget everything else, remember your name." She stared at the paper. It had been so long since she held a pen, so long since she wrote anything. Her hand shook, but she wrote slowly, carefully. Ravashi looked at the name, her name, and something inside her healed just a little more. The next morning, Elias found her standing alone. Not far from the blankets, just a few feet but without help. He smiled and said nothing. He didn't want to break the moment. Rava turned around, smiling proudly. "I did it," she said, her voice strong. "I know," Elias replied. "You're getting stronger." She walked to the table where he worked. Leaning on the wall, but moving on her own, she looked at the wires and asked, "What does this do?" He blinked, surprised. "It's part of a generator," he said. "Old tech, but still works. Can I help?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded, and just like that, she became more than just a survivor. She became a helper, a learner, a builder as she held the tools and copied his movements. She felt something growing inside her, not just strength, but purpose. And Elias, watching her from the side, knew that saving her wasn't a mistake. It was the start of something far greater than he expected. The sun was just beginning to rise when Rava stepped outside the shelter. Her feet pressed into the cool dirt, and for the first time, she didn't stumble. She stood tall, even if her knees still trembled a little. Her hands held a small box of wires, something Elias had asked her to repair. Inside the shelter, Elias was boiling water. His eyes tired but calm. They had found a rhythm. Quiet mornings, shared meals, slow progress. Rava still had nightmares. Still woke up sweating and shaking, but each time, Elias would sit beside her. Not speaking, just being there, and that meant more than words ever could. Rava was changing. She could feel it in her chest. Her fear was still there, but something else was growing beside it. A fire, but peace never stays for long, and today, it would break. The sound came first, a loud bang on the outer metal wall. Then voices rough, laughing, cruel. Rava froze, dropping the box from her hands. The wires spilled onto the ground, and her breath caught in her throat. Elias stepped out, calm but alert. He saw her face, pale, lips trembling. He didn't need to ask, he knew. Then the curtain door was yanked aside, and standing there, grinning wide, was the slaver from the market. Behind him stood two thugs, tall, armed, and grinning like jackals. "Well, well," the slaver said, stepping inside without permission. "Looks like the stray dog found herself." A master after all. Rava backed away, her legs shaking. She felt her chest tighten, her memories crashing back. Chains, hunger, kicks, laughter. Her body remembered, even if her mind wanted to forget. Elias stepped between them. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence filled the room like a wall. "She's not yours anymore," he said simply. "She's free." The slaver laughed hard. "Free? You think this thing can be free? She's property, broken goods. She was given to me for dirt, and now I hear she's walking, fixing things. That's value I didn't get paid for." "You sold her," Elias replied. "You took the credits." "Not enough," the slaver said, stepping closer. "She belongs to me, and I'm taking her back." Before Rava could cry out, Elias pulled something from under the table. A small, heavy weapon, old but working. He didn't aim it, he just held it steady in his hand. "I don't think you understand," Elias said quietly. "You're not welcome here." The room froze. The thugs reached for their own weapons, but Elias raised his. Fast, a warning shot blasted into the wall near the slaver's foot. Sparks flew and dust rained down. The slaver stepped back quickly, face changing from smug to angry. From angry to careful. "You'll regret this." He spat. "You think one broken girl is worth dying over?" "She's not broken," Elias said. "She's more whole than you'll ever be." The slaver snarled and turned. "Let's go," he growled to his thugs. "This place stinks anyway." They left in silence, footsteps loud on the dirt outside. The curtain fell closed and the quiet returned, but the air was heavy. Rava sank to the floor, breathing hard. Her body was shaking, not from weakness, but from fear. The fear of being taken again. The fear of chains, of collars, of becoming. Nothing. Elias crouched beside her, putting the weapon down. "He's gone," he said softly. "But he'll come back," she whispered. Elias didn't lie. He nodded slowly. "Maybe," he said. "But next time, we'll be ready." Rava looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion. "You didn't have to protect me," she said. "You could have let them take me. I didn't save you to let them take you again," Elias replied. "You're not a thing. Rava, you're a person." Her lips trembled, and for the first time since they met, she reached for his hand, not to be helped, but to hold. That night, they worked together to fortify the shelter. Elias showed her how to lock the outer panels. He gave her a small knife, light and sharp. She held it like it was a precious gift. "This is not for revenge," he said. "It's to protect yourself." Rava nodded, and deep inside, she promised herself she would never go back. In chains. In the days that followed, she trained more. Walking, lifting, learning how to disarm traps, how to fix weapons. Her body still hurt, but she ignored the pain, because now she had a reason to fight. She was no longer just surviving. She was preparing. Becoming something new, not just a rescued girl, not just a shadow, but someone with fire in her soul, someone who would not bow again. Rava stood in front of the mirror. If it could even be called that, it was just a cracked metal plate hanging on the wall, slightly bent. But it was the first time she saw her reflection clearly in months. The face looking back at her didn't look like a slave anymore. It looked like someone fighting to come back to life. Her silver hair was cleaner now, tied behind her head in a messy knot. Her cheeks were no longer sunken. Her bruises had faded, and her skin, though still scarred, looked stronger. She wore a simple gray tunic Elias had given her. It didn't hang like rags. It fit her, loosely, but it was hers. Outside the shelter, morning was beginning. Dust swirled in the golden light, and wind whispered across the broken land. Elias was already up, fixing a broken fuse box from an old merchant's cart. It started getting small repair jobs again. And this time, he had help. Rava. She stepped outside with steady feet. Her steps were confident, not perfect, but no longer weak. "Morning," Elias said, without turning. His hands were covered in grease. She crouched beside him and handed him a tool before he asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You're starting to read my mind." Rava gave a small laugh. The sound was soft and unfamiliar, even to her own ears. But it was real. They worked for an hour in silence, fixing, rewiring, cleaning. When it was done, the machine sparked back to life. The merchant, a short alien with 6 fingers, handed Elias some credits and nodded at Rava. "Good hands," the merchant said. Rava blinked in surprise. No one had ever complimented her like that before. Not for her hands, not for her work, not for anything. Later, back at the shelter, Elias gave her a piece of cloth. It was a small scar, worn but clean. "For you," he said. "Something to keep the dust out of your face." She touched the fabric slowly. Her fingers ran across the threads, as if it were silk. No one had ever given her something, not without expecting something in return. "Why?" she asked. Elias shrugged. "Because it suits you. And because I don't need it as much." She smiled without thinking. Just a small curve of her lips, quick. Unsure, but true. Elias saw it, and for a moment, his breath caught. It wasn't just a smile. It was the first light breaking through years of darkness. The kind of smile that Sadim's still here. "You should do that more often," he said, trying not to grin too much. She looked away, blushing slightly. I forgot how, she whispered. Elias didn't press her, but in his heart he felt something change. Not just in her, but in him. That afternoon, Rava asked for more tools. She wanted to build something of her own. Elias gave her a small workbench and a pile of scrap. He watched from the corner as she cut wires, shaped parts, and tightened bolts. She didn't ask for help, she wanted to do it herself. By evening, she had made a simple lantern. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. When the switch flipped, and the soft white light filled the room, she laughed. A real laugh, louder this time. Elias clapped once. Brilliant, he said. She looked at the lantern like it was a treasure. She had created something, not just survived. Her past didn't own her hands anymore. Later, as they sat near the fire, eating roasted roots and bread, Rava looked at the stars above. She hadn't looked up in so long. Do you think my brother is out there? She asked suddenly. Elias turned toward her, surprised. My little brother, she said, her voice soft. We were taken from the same village, but they pulled us apart. I was screaming, but they didn't stop. Elias didn't interrupt. He waited, listened. If he's alive, she continued. I want to find him one day. Her fingers gripped the scarf around her neck. Not as a slave, not like before, but as someone strong. You will, Elias said. You already are. She looked at him again. And this time her smile stayed longer, not hidden, not shig, just real. That night, before bed, she looked in the mirror again. She saw the same girl, but this time she saw something more. Strength, light, and the beginning of something new. And when she turned off the lantern she built herself, she whispered into the darkness, I'm not afraid anymore, Elias. Hearing from the other side of the room, smiled too, and in the quiet, a new bond was forming, not just of rescuer and rescued, but of two souls healing together. The sky was gray that morning. Clouds moved slowly above the marketplace, heavy. And lo, Rava walked beside Elias, her scarf wrapped around her neck. She still limped slightly, but her steps were strong now. The wind brushed her hair across her face. But she didn't stop to fix it. They were back in the very place she had once been chained like a dog, the slave market. Only this time, she wasn't kneeling in the dirt. She wasn't wearing rags. She wasn't silent and broken. Now, she walked upright, head high, her hands full of tools, and her eyes sharp. They had come to pick up parts from a trader, not to look at slaves, but the past had a way of pulling things back as they passed. A row of cages. Rava stopped, her breath caught in her throat. Elias noticed and turned back to her. What is it? He asked. She pointed, hand shaking slightly. There, in a dirty cage, sat a small alien girl, barely more than a child. Her wrists were chained, collar tight around her neck. She was thin, filthy, eyes swollen from crying. Rava couldn't move. She was staring at herself, not in a mirror, but in the past, the way the girl looked at the crowd. The fear in her bones. It was the same fear Rava had once lived with every day. The slaver behind the cage shouted, strong little thing, cheap price, trained for silence. People passed without care, without guilt, just like they had passed her. Elias put a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to watch this, he said gently, but Rava shook her head. No, she whispered, I do. She stepped forward, the crowd parting slightly. The girl in the cage looked up and their eyes met, big, watery, and tired, yet still searching. Just like hers had once. Searched for mercy. How much? Rava asked, her voice louder than she expected. The slaver laughed. You buying her? You don't look like you can pay. Elias pulled out the small pouch of credits they had saved from repair jobs. He handed it over without a word. The slaver smirked, unlocked the cage, and shoved the girl forward. She tripped and nearly hit the ground, but Rava caught her, held her, just like Elias had once caught her. The girl flinched, expecting pain. But Rava only knelt down, took off her own scarf, and wiped the child's face. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're free now." The child didn't understand. Freedom was a word she hadn't heard in too long. But she held onto Rava's arm tightly, as if afraid to be pulled away again. Back at the shelter, they cleaned her wounds, gave her warm food and water. She didn't speak, only watched with wide eyes. But her hands never let go of Rava's sleeve. Even as she slept curled on the blankets, Rava sat beside her. The girl's collar in her lap, the same kind she had worn for so long, it still had scratches. Dried blood and a number etched into it. It wasn't just a collar, it was a symbol. Elias walked over and sat beside her. "You okay?" he asked softly. Rava nodded, eyes still on the collar. "I don't think I ever really left that cage," she said. "Not fully." Elias said nothing. Sometimes silence said more. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "But now, I can help. Someone else leave theirs." She stood up, walked outside, and placed the collar on a wooden post near the shelter. Not as a warning, but as a memory. As proof that chains could be broken. The next day, the child finally spoke. Name. She whispered to Rava. Rava knelt down, smiling gently. "I'm Rava," she said. "And you?" The child hesitated, then whispered Tali. It was a small name, soft and simple. But it felt like a spark in the dark. The beginning of her own story. They started teaching her how to walk without fear. How to eat without hiding. Rava gave her small tasks. Clean this wire. Help me fold this cloth. Hold this tool. And slowly, just like Rava had, Tali began to change. One evening, Rava brought her to the mirror, the same one she had once stood before, in silence. "Look," she said. Tali stared, unsure. Her hair was clean, her face was soft. She didn't recognize herself. "Is that me?" she asked. Rava nodded. "Yes, the real you." Tali touched her own cheek and smiled awkward. Unsure, but real, Rava smiled too. It was the same smile Elias had once seen on her face. Now, she saw it in someone else, that night. Elias said something that stayed with Rava forever. "You didn't just save her," he said. "You saved the part of yourself you thought was gone." And as they sat under the stars, watching Tali sleep with her arms wrapped around a soft blanket, Rava whispered, "I'll never let her go back, because once someone had stopped for her, and now she was strong enough to stop for someone else." The wind was hot and dry as Rava walked through the market. Not the same broken girl who once sat chained in the dirt. Not the silent figure who begged for freedom with her eyes, but a woman who stood tall, with strength in her steps and fire. In her voice, Tali walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. The child's eyes darted around nervously. It was her first time back in the marketplace since she'd been freed. Rava squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe," she whispered. "I won't let anyone touch you." They weren't there to look at cages or slaves. They came for supplies, tools, wires, and parts for Elias's new generator. But fate has a way of testing those who rise from the ashes. As they moved past a large merchant stall, a voice called out, "Well, well." The little dog grew teeth. Rava stopped, slowly turning her head. Standing in front of her was the same slaver who once owned her, his face full of smug laughter, his eyes dripping with greed. "I heard rumors," he said, stepping closer, "that the worthless one I sold for scraps is now playing house with a human, and even rescuing other slaves." He looked down at Tali and sneered. "She yours now?" "She's not anyone's," Rava replied, her voice calm but sharp. "She's free." The slaver chuckled. "Come now, everyone's for sale at the right price, even you, pretty girl." Rava let go of Tali's hand and stepped forward. She didn't flinch, didn't look down. The crowd began to form around them, sensing something unusual. 2 guards stood behind the slaver, arms crossed, confident. He smiled and reached into his coat, pulling out a small pouch. 10,000 credits. He said, shaking it lightly. More than you are ever worth. Rava didn't blink. She didn't look at the pouch. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I'm not for sale." The crowd gasped quietly. The slaver raised an eyebrow. Surprised. "Everyone has a price," he said again. Rava stepped closer until they were only inches apart. "Not everyone," she said, her voice low and steady. "You had me once, and you broke me. But I rebuilt myself. You sold me like trash. And now you want me back because I become something valuable." She pulled the old collar from her satchel, the same one that once hung around her neck. She held it up for all to see. "This was your mark," she said to the crowd. "But now it's mine, and I wear it as a memory, not as a chain." She dropped the collar at the slaver's feet with a loud clink. It hit the ground like a final word. "Keep your credits," she said. "I wouldn't let you buy the dirt I walk on." The slaver's face twisted in anger. He motioned to his guards. "Teach her a lesson," he snapped. But before they could take a step, a deep voice cut through the air. "Touch her, and I'll break your hands." Elias stood behind the crowd, plasma tool in one hand, eyes locked on the slaver. People moved aside quickly. The guards paused, looking between Elias and Rava. Unsure. "You think you can protect her forever?" The slaver growled. Elias stepped forward and stood beside Rava. "I don't need to protect her," he said. "She's stronger than any of you." The slaver gritted his teeth, then turned with a snarl. "Let's go," he barked at his men. They stormed off, the crowd slowly returning to its usual noise. Rava let out a long breath, her hands still shaking slightly. Tali rushed to her, wrapping her arms around Rava's waist. "You didn't run," the child whispered. "You didn't hide." Rava knelt down and hugged her back. "I don't run anymore," she said. "I stand and I speak." Back at the shelter that evening, Elias handed her a cup of warm tea. They sat together in silence for a moment, the stars blinking above them. "You did something powerful today," Elias said finally. "You didn't just say no. You showed them what freedom really looks like." Rava nodded, her eyes staring into the dark sky. "I used to think freedom was just walking away from chains, but now I know. It's speaking when no one wants to listen. It's saying I matter even when they laugh." Tali came outside and sat beside her, sleepy and warm. "Can I be like you one day?" she asked. Rava smiled and pulled her close. "You already are." And somewhere in that silence, where once there had only been pain and fear, there was now peace, because she had found her voice. She had stood her ground, and she had finally said the words that changed everything. "I'm not for sale, not now, not ever again."